Let's take a look at how the front pages of the papers and inside the papers are dealing with the budget, which was announced last night. We're joined by the Chief Executive of Inside PR and former editor of The Age, Mike Smith. Mike Smith, good morning.
Good morning, Virginia.
Anything to declare?
Yeah, I'd like to make a declaration to Jonathan Holmes of Media Watch.
Yeah.
I am not a member of any political party, and nor have I ever been.
Yes.
I never volunteer commentary about my clients.
Yes.
And if I am asked about them, I make sure my interest is declared. And the colour of my tie is not a subliminal channeling of Tony Abbott, because that's his favourite colour tie.
Pale blue. I never realised pale blue was his favourite colour tie.
He wears it all the time now.
Well, you'll never be able to avoid that. You're pegged with it now, mate, no matter what you deny.
But Wayne Swan wore the same colour in his budget speech last night.
And now that we've got that out of the way, all right. Well, you've got the juicy front pages of the papers, which, as I said earlier, is always the great chance for newspapers to get out their best editorial stars, their editorial cartoonists and their illustrators. Because how else do you illustrate a budget? It's so dull.
It is, yeah. Look, the budget is a beauty parade for the papers. They roll out their big guns. It's an opportunity to get a lot of new readers and hope they hang on.
Yep.
I remember the days when an interesting budget would get an extra 40,000 readers. You know, nearly a 20% lift in circulation. I don't think that's the case now. In fact, I was talking to an editor of a major newspaper last week, and he thought the budget would be a turn off for readers. And that's because the budget lockup has become a farce. Yesterday they locked up hundreds of journalists for 6 hours in order to prevent them prematurely disclosing what the government had leaked and announced in the last 2 weeks. And while they're in there, they leaked and announced the remaining couple of interesting bits on the baby bonus and the projected surplus. It really is a bit of a joke. And,
yesterday was the high watermark for that being an absolute joke, I thought. And if the issue was always market sensitivity, well, they dealt with that themselves by getting it all out early.
Yeah, look, and I think the editor I spoke to this week was probably right. I think by now, by budget night, the public is sick of it. But the newspapers still have an arms race on how much space they devote to the budget. I think the Fin Review has got the thickest coverage, 32 tabloid pages.
Yep. Let's have a look at
the others aren't far behind. And I don't think I can't remember a budget, with the possible exception of Whitlam's last budget, where the press was so almost universally negative and cynical.
Well, there's the Australian Financial Review's editorials. We're going to spool through a few of the editorials this morning, and this is your selection of what the Financial Review's had to say about it, Mike. Yeah,
the Fin Review says Wayne Swan stands humiliated by blowing the money and the cash surplus from the mining boom. And they say that the government has trimmed its sails, but it hasn't changed direction, and this leaves Australia vulnerable. That's sort of typical of the economic analysis from some of the individual commentators.
Yep.
And the papers. Perhaps the kindest editorial this morning is in The Age. They're saying it's the kind of budget that's so tempered that it may make voters have a second look at Labor. It shouldn't lose them too many more votes. And Swan may reflect that his last budget, that his best budget was his last, true to Labor principles and responsible in its structure. But even The Age says that will be little consolation because they're heading towards defeat.
And we've got the Herald Sun as well.
The Herald Sun doesn't mince words. It says it's all a crock. It's a political budget with no proper fiscal underpinning. Its foundations are simply not there, and they can't wait for 122 days to go before the election.
Get them to the ballot box. The Telegraph, the Sydney Telegraph.
Yeah, the sister paper of the Herald Sun, the second biggest selling paper in the country, says that the budgets ensure that all Australians will be penalised, and future Australians are especially vulnerable. And then they attack Wayne Swan's analogy with postcode equality, and they say postcodes have nothing to do with it when the debt of this size is on the table.
And finally, The Australian, which has a mighty coverage this morning, a huge amount of newsprint and words devoted to the budget.
It does. And it begins its editorial by damning the government with some faint praise, and then after about the third sentence, it rips into the government's underpinnings, and it cannot resist linking the budget to having another slash at the ABC and Fairfax, saying that they have no doubt that this morning they'll take the Treasurer's bait and turn the budget analysis into a focus on the opposition, and they're urging the opposition to steel himself for a fight over Gonski and infrastructure while letting through the disability insurance scheme.
How did we come into it? I'll leave it for viewers this morning to see whether we're overly focusing on the opposition this morning or not.
But in fact, their own editor at large is leading the charge on challenging Abbott. Paul Kelly, who's the Australia's former editor-in-chief and now the editor at large.
He's the writer emeritus.
Yeah, he's the eminence grise of the press gallery now.
That's the
phrase. And he is in fact throwing down the gauntlet to Tony Abbott and saying that Abbott must decide whether to commit to the big Labor agenda or stand and defy. If he commits to it, he must decide whether to support Labor's decade-long saving cuts, many of which he detests. But if he rejects Labor's savings, he must produce his own alternative saves.
Yes, that's part of that narrative that started up pretty much yesterday or the day before, that this was a budget aimed at laying landmines for an incoming coalition government. Are you persuaded by that argument?
Yeah, I am. I think it's a pretty cynical argument, but I'm sure it's one that the Labor Party is briefing the commentators on. In Paul Kelly's words, he says the trap has been set for Abbott. Laura Tingle in the Fin Review has even more colourful language. I mean,
I'm going to give Laura Tingle in the Fin Review the Metaphor of the Day award, because she goes to World War II and Russia.
She does.
I love this image.
And well before World War II.
Yes, indeed.
She said the budget owes much to the scorched earth tactics used over the centuries by the Russians, who used to retreat from Moscow in the face of a numerically superior enemy, systematically destroying their own country as they lured the enemy to follow them into a country devoid of sustenance. Scorched earth, landmines. Laura is
devoid of sustenance.
Laura, I guess, after the departure of Michelle Grattan from the Canberra Print Press Gallery, Laura is the doyenne of the press gallery now. She's been there 25 years. She's a Walkley winner and a fine journalist, and she just simply says that Labor's looking beyond the next election. They're looking at 2016 and trying to lock in their reforms, daring Abbott to turn them back, and setting Labor up for not this election but for next election.
Let's have a look at Terry McCrann in the Herald Sun.
Terry McCrann, yeah.
Another eminence. Is he greased these days? He's not too grey? He's a little grey.
He's still got some...
He's got a little bit of hair.
A little bit of hair, yeah. I mean, Terry is the most widely read syndicated business columnist in the country, probably about 2.8 million readers across all the tabloids, and he just simply says Swan's got nothing to lose except an election. He says Wayne Swan's a very slow learner and he thinks we are too. He just keeps promising surpluses and hopes we believe it, and he just sums up by saying, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah, it's a very, very cynical response this morning.
Yeah, but of course
what else would you expect?
Most perceptions of the budget will be formed by the two tabloid front pages, Herald Sun and Telegraph, and I think they're pretty blunt and plain. The Herald Sun front page is just flogging a dead horse, and in Sydney, the Daily Telegraph has PM's Swan Song. And those messages are pretty blunt, pretty clear, and pretty much sum up a lot of the press commentary.
Yep. It's a rough morning to wake up to if you're in the government, wouldn't it be, with those sort of images, and that's just the way it goes. Really good to talk to you, Mike. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Virginia.